Today we talked about the different theories of emotion, primarily trying to say how do we process information that is available in our external environment, and then how do we actually come forward with an emotional response. Then we talked about the basic emotions. Today we are going to talk about the primary elicitors of emotions, and those are primarily the neurochemical elicitors, the sensory motor elicitors, motivational and cognitive elicitors. Now, when we talk of stimulation in terms of what neurochemical functions actually takes place within the body that gives birth to a type of emotional response, then we find that either there could be an increased stimulation or decreased stimulation. Increased stimulation, when we look at it, we find that sudden increase can activate positive as well as negative emotions. For example, interest is a positive emotion, whereas fear is a negative emotion, and both of these emotions include sudden increase in the stimulation level. When we look at the decrease process, then sudden decrease can only activate positive emotion. For example, joy. Now, suddenly your stimulation level decreases and this decrease is sudden. So, what we find in terms of activation with respect to the stimulation is that if you have an increased stimulation, it can lead to positive as well as negative emotions, whereas decreased stimulation will lead to positive emotions only. Then if you look at it from a high, moderate and low stimulation point of view, you find that sustained high level of stimulation activates only negative emotions, such as distress and anger, for example. If you take happiness, then it basically is a product of a moderately high stimulation. So, basically you have a moderate high stimulation, only then you can have an experience such as happiness, whereas just the diametrically opposite of happiness, that is sadness, then it involves low stimulation. So, if there is a sustained low level of stimulation, then only negative emotions get activated. So, what we find is that if sustained high level of stimulation, then negative emotions, sustained low level of stimulation, then again negative emotions, and if we have a moderate high stimulation, then we have the positive emotions. Now, before we come to the aspects of emotions, we again go back and see what we considered as the elicitors of emotions. So, one of course is the neurochemical elicitors. Right now, we discussed that what the sustained high low level of stimulation can do, what moderate stimulation can do, and what if there is a sudden increase or sudden decrease in stimulation level, then how it affects our emotions. Similarly, we have certain sensory motor elicitors, we have our own motivational state that comes into play, and then our own cognitive factors. Look at this news item. Here you find a student charged with the political motivation of bifurcating one of the existing states of India, namely Andhra Pradesh. His motivational state finally makes him think of self-immolation. Let us see yet another example. Here you see a policeman who is disgusted of a false charge against him. Finding himself helpless, he also thinks of self-immolation. A set of police personnel try not to allow him do that, while you find someone assisting in lighting the matchstick. Look at this video clip. Here you find a set of civilians protesting against the police, and finally they torch the police vehicle. All the three videos that you saw right now were emotionally charged. What is also important to see here is the motive of the individual involved in these acts. Remember, we are right now referring to motivation as an elicitor of emotion. Let us now see an example of interplay between motivation, cognition and emotion. These are the images of police brutality in Gurgaon in India. on workers of automobile company who were on strike. Look at this man in a sky blue shirt who is trying to save himself from this lathi charge. All his attempts turn in vain. He is surrounded by policemen. And then comes this officer. He saw this lonely target surrounded by so many policemen and came to stop others from hitting this young man. Why did he think so while others did not? And here lies the importance of cognitive processes. In a given situation, a set of people are agitated because their demands are not fulfilled, they are aroused. A battery of police force is deputed and they resort to brutal lathi charge. They are also aroused, and amidst such highly charged situation, you find an officer whose cognitive appraisal tells him that it was inappropriate to single out someone and brutally attack him. You can clearly see how cognitive and motivational elicitors influence human emotion. Let us now talk about aspects of emotion. When you look at the aspects of emotion, emotion has a feeling component involved in it, a physiological arousal mechanism involved in it, and then the action orientation. Now, feeling primarily entails the private and the subjective feeling of the individual, the one who experiences the emotion in a given state. Physiological arousal is basically a state of distinctive somatic and autonomic response. And most importantly, there is an action orientation in emotion, the fight and the flight reactions. So, either you tend to fight or you tend to fly away from the situation, you try your best to avoid the situation. When you look at the current trend in emotion studies, you find that a set of researchers, they are focusing on the subjective experience component of it. So, the primary focus lies on how an individual feels it, how an individual explains the whole process of a particular emotional experience. Simultaneously, we have well grounded studies in physiological mechanism of emotion, which talks primarily about the basic physiological changes that takes place in an emotional state, how it can be altered, and all these processes. Another trend of study which primarily looks at the facial expression and how it changes with respect to emotion. And then we also have the appraisal processes, which primarily looks at the cognitive emotion, regulation of emotion. At the same time, it talks about stress and coping mechanism also. We have the evolutionary psychology viewpoint gradually coming in a big way. And then in terms of applied part of the emotion research, you find that speech technology has come in a big way, and emotion expression are studied in the voice and speeches, especially with respect to the speech technology, where you have the spectrographic analysis of how different types of voice modulation can be studied with respect to emotion expression, and of course, technology serves in a better way there. In terms of the interaction one has at the workplace, how one behaves, how one is able to handle certain type of situations, from that point of view, the study of emotional intelligence has become pretty important. And then we also find that emotionally intelligent interfaces are also the primary target of research, where that is the basically a combination of design and emotion. So, little later we will come to a few of these things to see how the modern trend of studies in emotion has moved. Now, look at this very video. What you actually find is making a comparison between the human facial expression and the facial expression of its distant relative, where you find that the evolutionary psychologists, they are primarily interested making a comparison how human facial expressions have actually carried forward certain forms of expression that are also visible in the animal kingdom. Let us now talk about one particular emotion, that is anger, simply because it has certain survival significance attached to it, and this is how people will primarily look at it from the evolutionary psychology point of view. There is an innate tendency in human beings to prioritize threat stimuli compared to the neutral stimuli in terms of processing. Now, because of their survival significance, the brain identifies threatening stimuli very fast, and therefore, fear inducing animals such as snakes or negative emotion expressions such as anger are identified very fast compared to the other emotions which does not put a survival threat in front of you. The cognitive and the neural models of threat processing advocate specialized mechanisms for threatening stimuli. They suggest attentional preference for such stimuli. For example, preferential processing of reptiles such as snakes. Similarly, angry faces get preference over non-emotional stimuli such as neutral faces. For example, if you have two things in front of you, two animals in front of you, something that has a connotation for you that this is an object of fear, something like a snake versus say a lizard, even though you may not like the lizard, you know that your life is not under threat in case you are facing a lizard. Now, in this case, when you have two reptiles present in front of you, a lizard and a snake, the brain will preferentially process the snake and not the lizard, primarily understanding that in case it makes an error in judgment, then it leads to a threat to your survival. Similarly, when you looked at the angry face right now, when you have somebody who is very angry at you and somebody who is not angry, or you say either you are neutral or you are happy, one will primarily focus at somebody who is angry, and the reason being that if you are angry, I anticipate that you may cause a harm to me. I want to safeguard myself, and therefore, the angry faces are to be processed on the basis of priority, simply because you do not want to put yourself under any risk. You will now see protest by people who are displaced after their land was acquired by the government for construction of a mega dam in one part of India. Here you identify a lady in the mob who seems to be very vocal about her problem. You can clearly see the police personnel clearly targeting someone who was most vocal in expression of anger. Here, the lady was preferred over rest in the crowd by the police force. This is an example of preferential processing of anger. The outcome of visual cueing tasks also support preferential processing of angry faces over neutral ones, and this has been found true even for schematic faces also. The advantage of using schematic facial expression over the real face is the reduction of confounding effects of familiarity and other similar characteristics. So, instead of taking a normal natural human being who is somewhere, who could be someone around you, you basically substitute the original face so as to reduce the confounding effect with a schematic representation. And even with a schematic representation, it has been found that compared to neutral schematic facial expressions, the angry ones are given preferences. When you look at facial expression of emotion, how people have investigated this part, we find that in an attempt to understand nuances of facial expressions, psychologists have taken various factors into account, such as culture, type of participants, type of expression, the type of stimulus and the response format. In the case of culture, you would find good number of studies basically comparing non-Western to the Western culture. People have also taken the literate and the pre-literate participants. People have gone for posed versus spontaneous emotions, where posed condition would be, say, like I take somebody who is good at this art and say that fine, you have to express a particular emotion on your face and then you do so. That is the posed emotion, whereas the spontaneous emotion would be that in a natural situation you simply record the facial expression and you study it. People have gone for static stimulus, people have gone for videotaped ones, and of course, in terms of response format we find that people have gone either for a matching task, where you are given a task and then you have to match it with the available options, or you go for a labeling task where you do not have an option, but you simply look at it and then give a meaning to it, a label to it. You name what this emotion is, what this facial expression actually represents. We come to another interesting theory, which primarily is making somewhere a combination of the cultural and the neural factor, what is popularly called as the neurocultural theory of emotion, given by Paul Ekman. Paul Ekman in 1972 postulated this theory. As I told you, this is called the neurocultural theory of emotion, and this very theory is based on the earlier work of Tompkins and McArthur. They had formulated one such proposal in 1964. Now, according to Ekman, an innate facial affect program activates human facial expression, and the facial affect program offers a one-to-one map between the felt emotion and the displayed facial expression. He believes that this program is same for everybody across culture. Hence, there is uniformity in emotion expression in non-social settings. Remember, he talks about the non-social setting here. However, cultural specific display norms make people mask, intensify or neutralize their expressions to suit a shared norm. The display rules are conscious management techniques. This is what Ekman has said. Now, I like to quote here interesting study done by Mandal, Harizuka, myself and Mishra in 2001, where hemifacial composites were used, and primarily this very study tried to verify the Ekman's neurocultural theory of emotion. Attempt was made to know how neurocultural components interact with side of the face and valency of the emotion in a given culture. Look at the three sets here. You have a Canadian face, an Indian face and Japanese face. Basically, right now we were talking about spontaneous versus posed emotion. These are posed emotions. These were the set of people who were told that fine, you have to display a particular expression on your face. But what you find here also is, on the left panel you see here written LR, LL and RR. Now, these are actually faces where some changes have been introduced. Now, the top one you see are the natural faces, means natural means you ask somebody to pose a particular expression and the photograph was taken, and therefore, L represents the left and R represents the right side of the faces. So, it is a normal human face the way we look at it. Now, the second row that you see here is actually the left side of the face. Here actually what has been done using the Rhodes technique, where you take this very point here, the point here between the two eyebrows and then the tip of the nose, and then you vertex of the upper lip, and then you make a straight line here, and this is how you bisect the face into two. Once you bisect the face into two, then the mirror image of the left side of the face is generated, and then these two sets are combined. So, the second row that you see here is not actually the natural face, but it actually represents the left side of the face and the mirror image of the left side of the face put together. So, this is actually only the left side of the face. The lower one is the right face. Little later I will also show you with one single case how this was actually done in context of a different study, where you will see that actually the left and the right side of the faces are not the same. But right now we are talking about the neurocultural theory of emotion. So, this is how different facial emotions were taken, the 6 basic emotions as well as the neutral face, and then the left and the right combinations were made. The findings substantiated Ekman's theory. There was a distinctive judgment of facial expressions of all three cultures, Japanese, Indian and North American. This confirmed the universality hypothesis. Now, similarity in the emotional expression of faces were found across Japanese, Indian and North American groups, primarily reflecting that yes, irrespective of the culture, people do identify the facial expressions. Now, negative emotions were most distinctively identified in North American faces, followed by Indian and Japanese faces. Valency of the emotional state induced cultural variability. Japanese and Indian expressed their negative emotions less distinctively as compared to the North Americans. But what was interesting was Japanese, they tend to mask their negative feelings, Indians they tend to neutralize them as compared to the North Americans. Positive emotions, happiness and surprise, were more pronounced on the right side of the Japanese expressors and in the left face of the Indian and the North American expressors. Other studies have also confirmed the masking of negative emotion expressions in the Japanese participants. This is a very old study, Freisen's study in 1972. Another study by Mandal et al. In 1996 suggesting that negative emotion expressions are less distinct in Indians as compared to North Americans. And again yet another study by Lebra in 1976 suggesting that Japanese tend to replace the facial expression of displeasure by smile. So, whenever you have a displeasure, instead of expressing it, you put a smile on your face. So, basically what you do is that your smile replaces displeasure. Now, Matsumoto extended this theory from expression to perception of emotions. So, according to Matsumoto, across cultures people perceive emotional expressions in the same way. However, they acknowledge this or do not do so based on culture specific norms. For example, Japanese mask their negative emotions with smiling, while Oriental Indians they de-intensify negative emotions such as fear and anger. So, you find that the culture starts affecting how you would express yourself, although there is a neural control over the left and the right side of the expression of the faces. When we talk of culture and emotion, Freisen asked the subjects to view a stressful film in two conditions, all alone and along with him. So, the subjects basically viewed films in stressful film in two conditions, all alone and with the experimenter, and what was found was that the pan cultural facial signals were observed during the spontaneous expression of emotions in isolated conditions when the subjects were viewing the film all alone, whereas the culture specific expressions were observed in the social reciprocation condition, that is when you view the film with the experimenter. Now, what you actually find here is very interesting, that when you are all alone, when you are watching the film alone in an isolated condition, the pan cultural facial signals are observed, and when you are in the company of somebody who shares your own culture, then you have culture specific expressions on the face. A major intricacies in the study of facial expression is isolating the learned components, that is the cultural specific components, from the universal components. Universal components are the pan cultural components, and there is difficulty to isolate culture and biological components of posed facial expression. So, these are of course the challenges, and irrespective of whether the posed expressions have been drawn out of instructions to create them by imagining a situation or muscle instruction where you are told that fine twitch this muscle, extend this muscle. Now, they are also not free from the learned components. Little later we will come to the musculature analysis of facial expression, where we will see what muscles actually help in what facial expression. When faces are studied with respect to asymmetry on the faces, right now you had Mandal et al. Study where the normal face was taken, and then using the Rhodes technique the left and the right faces were separated, combined with their mirror images to create a LL and an RR face. So, let us talk about the facial asymmetry. Neuropsychological studies suggest that the two sides of the human face are not equally pronounced during emotional expressions, and emotions are expressed more intensely on the left side of the face. So, when you feel a particular emotion, the intense emotion gets represented on the left side of your face and not on the right. Whereas, the studies of facial asymmetry shows that socially appropriate cues are apparent on the right side of the face, whereas personalized feelings are visible on the left side of the face. This primarily will mean that what you feel within actually gets represented on the left side of your face. So, when you are very happy meeting somebody, and when you say, oh, I am really glad to see you, you have extreme representation of that glad that you are saying, the happiness on your left side of the face, and the right side will also be actually representing that happiness. Whereas, when you do something that is socially appropriate, but you do not feel so. For example, you tell somebody, oh, nice meeting you, glad to see you, but you are not glad within. In that situation, what you realize is that the right side of the face will not be so what you call comparable compared to the left side of the face, because on the left side of the face you have your true feelings. The true feeling is that you are not happy, whereas the social norm actually will demand that fine, you should express your feeling like this, that you are really happy to see somebody, and therefore, your right face will you will try to manipulate it in some way to represent happiness, whereas your left face does not show that. And the primary reason for that is that the right hemisphere deals with the emotional processes, whereas the left hemisphere controls the processes in terms of social appropriateness. Now, we have a contralateral control, left hemisphere controlling the right side of the face, right hemisphere controlling the left side of the face. So, when my right hemisphere actually processes the emotional processing, now these emotional processes actually will get represented on the left side of my face because of the contralateral control, and therefore, what will actually happen is that I have a feeling, my left hemisphere processes it, and therefore, I have a pronounced expression of that emotion on my face. Whereas, when you look at the control mechanism of the left hemisphere, it actually looks at the social appropriateness. Now, my left hemisphere looks at the social appropriateness, and therefore, from the left face it is a contralateral control. So, it comes to my right side of the face, and that is the reason why we have disparity between the two sides of the faces, what is called as facial asymmetry. I like to share one of my studies with you, which was primarily on the hemifacial composites. I am taking just two examples. Again, in this study actually all the 6 basic emotions, happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise and disgust, all 6 of them were taken, as well as the neutral face was also taken. I am just for demonstration, I am taking 2 emotions, happy and fear expressions. Now, you see on the top, you see the left face of a male who is happy, the right face of a male who is afraid. The bottom you see a happy female and a afraid female. So, basically you have happiness and fearness, and you see the expressions. What was actually done in this study was, you see here a normal photograph of that female expressing happiness. Now, as I was narrating to you that there is a Rhodes technique wherein you divide the face into 2 halves, and you see here the left face and the right face. So, left face is actually the original photograph is put here on the top and the bottom. Now, left face is a face where the external cues are retained and the facial cues are removed. The right side of the face is wiped out, whereas in the lower one where it is written R, basically showing that this is the right side of the face, the left side of the face has been removed. All facial cues are removed here, and then you see here written MIL and MIR on the bottom. Now, these are actually the mirror images. You have the left face, create a mirror image of the left face, mirror image of left is MIL here, and then when you join the 2, you have the LL composite, the left composite. Whereas, when you have the R face, that is the left erased face, and you create a mirror image of it, and when you combine them you have the RR composite. Now, you see you can match now these 2, the normal and the LL-RR images. The normal image does not match with the LL or the RR composite. This primarily tells you very clearly that see your left and the right faces are not the same. Okay. And the basic distinction once again is that what you feel within gets represented on your left face, whereas what is socially desired, what is socially appropriate comes on the right side of the face, and therefore, the happiness, the women who is happy here, the left and the right faces are not equally happy. What I found in this study was that the normal facial representations are judged with greater accuracy than facial composites, and this is primarily because all of us live in this world, we interact in a normal situation, and therefore, normal facial expression, the judgment rate, the accuracy rate is pretty high. No sex difference was found in terms of perception of emotion. So, male and the female, the respondents, they were not different. LL, that is the left, RR, the right, and the R composites of happiness were most distinctly identified. The mirror image of right anger composite was also very distinct. What was also found was that the identification of anger was lateralized. Approach emotions were perceived better than withdrawal emotions, and there was a right visual field superiority for happiness, whereas there was a left visual field superiority for anger. Now, left visual field superiority would mean that the right hemisphere was dominant, whereas the right visual field superiority, what was for happiness, would actually mean that the left hemisphere was dominant. Lateralization of anger identification, you remember right now we talked about the fact that yes, anger is always processed with priority because there is a survival significance attached to it, and the brain will always prioritize its processing. Isert found that the expressions on the right face are less distinct as the display rules may miniature, suppress or temporarily abbreviate them. So, this means that when you have an expression on the right face, the social display rules comes into being, and therefore, you have a miniature, separation or temporary aberration. So, what you do is not actually what you want, but what you do is what you consider to be socially desirable in that situation. Researchers have also found that the sex of the expressor, means the one who is giving a posed emotion, who is posing that emotion. So, the sex of the expressor and the category of emotion, whether it is positive or negative, they also influence the cultural display norms for facial expressions. Now, when we talk about facial expression, we have talked only about facial expressions of adults. Let us talk about emotions in infants, because from the evolutionary viewpoint, one will always try to find out that okay, if the socially appropriate cue has to come on the right side of the face, okay, this means that I have to live in a given society for certain period of time, so as to learn what the desirable code of conduct are. Now, how do infants who have little or close to zero influence of the culture, how do they express their emotion? And I like to discuss with you the Lewis developmental theory, which suggests that infants are endowed with the inborn cognitive capacity to have a subset of emotion such as joy, sadness, fear, anger, surprise and disgust. Now, Lewis developmental theory says that attainment of remaining emotions take place during the two cognitive developments. One, the acquisition of the self concept, and the other one is the acquisition of SRG. SRG is the standard rules and goals of one's society. This means that initially what you have is an inborn cognitive capacity, wherein you have a subset of emotions with you such as joy, sadness, fear, anger, surprise and disgust as a newly born child, whereas in the due process of socialization, in the due process of cognitive development, you attain two things. One, you acquire your self concept, who am I, what do I belong to, what are the things, where do you have your stake and so forth. So, you have gradually derived a concept of the self, and that would influence your expression of certain emotions on the face. On the other side, you also acquire what Lewis theory calls at SRG, the standards of the given society, the rules of the given society and the goals of the given society. So, society tells you what to do, what not to do, and how to express yourself in a given situation. Take for example, you have a situation where everybody else is grieving. It is a say somebody has died. Now, as adults we know what the display code of conduct says. You have a display norms. There are certain standards that the society has set. For example, few cultures would say that fine, if you are attending the last rites of somebody, you should put on white clothes. White clothes are actually the representation of certain social expectations, whereas in few culture you have a black costume. So, if you attend a funeral ceremony, you put black clothes. There is a distinction. Now, white or black per se has nothing to do with mourning, but then when you grieve, when you show that yes, I am also experiencing bereavement, I also grieve, I also am saddened by the death of somebody, primarily you have a color coding, white uniform or black uniform, and that is something that is culturally told to you. So, now these are the social rules. There are certain standards now. Now, say imagine a situation, you are attending the last rites of somebody, the funeral ceremony, somebody has died, everybody is saddened, and then as a newly born child, as an infant, you do not know the code of conduct, you do not have any SRG with you. The standards of the society, the rules of the society, the goals of the society, these are not known to you. So, if you feel crying, you cry. If you feel laughing, if you feel expressing your joy, fine, you do so. Whereas, imagine an adult in that situation. Say, you go to a funeral ceremony and you receive a SMS, some type of a joke. Now, when you read that joke, you feel laughing, but then the moment you feel laughing, you also have your SRG telling you, no my dear, you can't do so. Okay. Why? Because you are in a given situation where you are attending the last rites of an individual, and therefore, you have to actually abide by the social code of conduct. Now, Lewis says that till you acquire your self concept and till you acquire the SRG, primarily what happens is that you live only with joy, sadness, fear, anger, surprise and disgust. And when later on in your phase of cognitive development, when you acquire your self concept and when you acquire your SRG, this is how the social display norms start affecting your facial expression. For example, emotions such as envy, empathy, embarrassment, pride and shame, they cannot be experienced without realizing one's position with respect to other. Now, I am envy of something. Say for example, I see you say carrying a laptop which I do not have. Now, unless you carry that laptop or I see that laptop under the possession of somebody, I cannot envy. So, I have to have a particular emotion with respect to the presence of something. Similarly, empathy. Say you are crossing the road and you find that there is a old lady who has difficulty crossing the road. Now, unless you see that object, okay, you see that the old lady there, you do not have that feeling in you. You are embarrassed, and that embarrassment is not because you are all alone, but that embarrassment comes because of you compare your situation with compared to something. Pride for example, similarly shame for example. Now, this implies that the twofold cognitive development, the acquisition of the self concept and the acquisition of the SRG are not needed for experiencing an expression of the basic emotions. Now, basic emotions which includes joy, sadness, fear, anger, surprise and disgust surface before achievement of self consciousness. Certain other emotions such as embarrassment, envy and empathy may emerge before the integration of a moral system. The study of infants can be extremely helpful in terms of understanding the relationship between emotion and facial expressions, as they are not influenced by social norms. Okay. However, there is a serious limitation to it, as they cannot express their emotions in words. So, when you look at infants studies, you see only the images.
either you see the static images or you see the videotapes, but then you cannot have the wordly expression of the emotions. Now, look at these expressions. It is intricate to draw discrete negative expressions from a crying bout of the infant. The infants tend to cry in all negative situations. A close look at the crying face illustrates this interesting pattern. Now, you see this child, the crying child, you see lowering of the eyebrow, corner of the lips pulled to a side, opening of a mouth and a raising of the cheek. The crying face has a mixed feature of anger and distress both. So, when you look at this face, you see that this infant is crying, but when you actually make analysis on the basis of the features that you see here, what you find is that this face has anger and distress both on the face. On the adult face, usually you do not find that. Now, look at this expression. You have muscle contraction near the eye and upward lifting of the cheek. Now, although what we call it that the child is expressing joy, the child is smiling, but remember that Ekman has made a distinction between joyful and non-joyful smiling. So, the infant could still be smiling, but it could be a non-joyful smile. Now, smiles without cheek raising, non-emotional smile for social interaction and masking of the negative feelings, these are also important. Now, you look at these set of expressions here. What you see is that two different type of facial expressions, the left panel and the right panel, the two columns that you see here, but then both if you move in the fashion of the rows according to the rows, you actually see the same emotion. So, you have a strong cry on the face, you have a moderate cry, again another moderate cry and a weak cry. But then when you compare, for example, where you find written here a strong cry, when you look at the left face and the right face, okay, the child is actually, the expression is strong, but then when you look at the facial feature, you find actually that as if these two are different. Similarly, when you look at the moderate cry, there are 4 different types of expression, 4 photographs here, where you find that the cry is moderate, but the facial expressions are different. And when you look at the weak cry, okay, again the facial expressions are different in the left and the right side, but then these actually represent weak cry here. Now, again look at these sets of images. On the top, again you find very strong smile, okay, with open mouth. Now, look at this. Now, you have opening of the mouth, and the top 2 images, the left and the right side, they represent very strong smile. Look at the second one. Now, you have minimal smile, but the mouth is again open, and again these are no strong and minimal smile with open mouth, whereas you have closed mouth in the bottom 2 images. Now, in the third row you find there that there is a strong smile, but the mouth is closed, and then you have a strong smile with the mouth closed. So, basically you find that there is too much of changes in terms of how the infants would express their feelings. What also is found is that the positive emotions are reflected by infants in the form of a smile without raising the cheek, which later on converts into cheek raised smile with intensification of emotion. So, when you are an infant, actually you could smile without raising your cheek, whereas gradually what happens along with changes in your system, when you go for this socially derived set of norms and you learn them, with intensification you go for raising your cheek. So, you will manipulate this part of the face because you are trying to intensify the given emotion. Now, although all smiles reflect positive emotion, certain types of smiles represent more of it compared to others. Now, comparison of mother's brain activation has also been done when they watch their own babies versus unfamiliar children. So, a mother looking at one's own child and looking at child of a matched age and sex, but they are unfamiliar children. What has been found is that there is an activation of amygdala, insula, limbic area and the orbitofrontal cortex in the mothers when they watch their own children. So, when you look at it from a neural perspective and when you try to find out the neural base of maternal love, you say that okay, these are the areas of the brain which actually has a control over a maternal love. This primarily would also mean that when these mothers looked at the unfamiliar children, they did not have that much of activation of these very areas. Look at the facial expression of infants, distress, both these images represents distress. Discomfort, again both the emotional expressions here represents discomfort. Comfort, and once again you see that the facial expressions are different. Pleasure, and once again there is a difference. Another interesting fMRI study found a strong activation of amygdala and interconnected limbic regions for infants' cries in parents. Basically, this means that the infants are crying, and when parents look at their infants who are crying, how their brain behaves. And this could be analyzed as a mark of neuroplasticity in the parents to subserve a biological need. This primarily would mean that when you are not experiencing parenthood, for example, if I am not a father as of now, I do not have a child, then the activation of the brain and the interconnected limbic regions will not be so as compared to when I have become a father and when I look at my own infant crying, brain will behave differently. And this basically is also an indicator that you have the capacity as a parent wherein your brain helps you serve a biological need. Your brain makes you a father that fine, this is the time when you have to take care of the infant who is purely dependent on you. Right now what we have done is that how the mother's brain respond when they look at the familiar babies and unfamiliar babies, means one's own baby and unfamiliar children. This is the first study that we discussed right now, and later on we found that fine, you have parents looking at the crying kids, their own kids, and how their brain responds, primarily reflecting that fine we have neuroplasticity wherein to subserve the biological needs your brain gets reactivated. How do the kids look at their parents when they are infants? So, one study, interesting study which primarily looks at the scan pattern of the infants when they were 1 and 2 month old infants, and what is found is that the eyes and the mouth are the primary target. Now, look here, the 1 month old child is looking at the mother's face, and then you see right from the start point how the eye fixation changes and finally goes and sticks at some point. In the other image you see a 2 month old child looking at the father, and then you see right from the start point how the fixation point changes and finally it stops somewhere. Now, this is how the infants they look at their parents. Bridges proposed that the newly born babies have undifferentiated emotional expressions. So, what he found was that fine at the time of birth the children have general excitement. 2 to 3 months, this general excitement classifies into distress and delight. So, these are the two emotions, and then distress further gets classified into anger, disgust and fear by the age of 6 months, and this is how maturation starts affecting different types of emotions. We have talked about several concepts at length, and this is time for us to recapitulate.